So it's 12:01, pretend there's a watch there. I've got 4 hours to get a video out. Let's go. What's up and welcome to FPL Today. I'm JNO, welcome to the channel and welcome to the second to last video of the FPL How to Play Fantasy Premier League series. And today we're going to look at team value. But before we get into the episode, this episode's been brought to you by the FPL Today Teespring store, where you can buy the 30 days of FPL and FPL Today official merchandise. So go and check that out and let's get into the video. So player value, this is something I want everyone that plays FPL, especially who watches my channel, to take into consideration when they're picking their team. There are clearly some players that are great players in FPL, will score lots of points, but just because they score lots of points and just because they're the most expensive players, that doesn't necessarily mean you need them in your side. You have to look at all the expensive players, all the cheaper players, and figure out who is the best value for money and who will build the team as an 11 to 15 man squad that will help you get the most points and get you the highest ranking in the game. The basics of player value is just because a player scores more points doesn't mean he's the best option. Someone like Joshua King last season with 178 points is every bit as important as an Alexis Sanchez last year who scored 264. The reason for that is Alexis Sanchez was almost double the price of Joshua King and didn't score double the points of Joshua King. Player value links in with things like squad budgeting, having a balanced team, and you'll hear a lot of FPL players say that team doesn't look too balanced when they do rate teams. So what they mean by balanced is, does that look like the team that will score the most points? Because you could have Alexis Sanchez and Harry Kane, but then if the rest of your team is that weak, you aren't going to be getting a big ranking and big overall score. In essence, if points are close or nearly the same, it's most likely the cheaper player is actually the better option if you're just looking at the entire season or for a short period of time. Either way, if the points are very similar, the cheaper player can allow you to bring in someone else in another position that may score more than the person you already have there. There are loads of indicators in the game and outside of the game that you can use to consider player value and pick the best players for your team. In the FPL game itself, you have value in brackets season and value in brackets form. Those two are on the drop down menu in the transfer window when you are making transfer decisions on the game. Value season is total points divided by price, whereas value form is form being points per game over the last 30 days divided by price. And then there's also points per match, which shows you on average how many points per match a player is getting. All of these can be indication of how valuable a player is, irrelevant of their price or taking their price into consideration. And then you've got outside of FPL, you have sites that will show you things like points per million per game, and value over replacement player calculations, which will show you again which player is actually more valuable to have in your side. Now I'm telling you all of that because I want you to know of what is out there for you to look up and what you can use to help benefit you over the season. I personally don't like to get too deep into those stats. I prefer to focus on things like underlying stats in actual game, where I can see, is a player getting a lot of shots on goal? Are a lot of them coming from inside the box? Are they big chances? That sort of thing. But I do take player value into consideration in a bit more of a simpler form, without doing any maths, and that may be a downside to how I play the game. I will look at players and consider if their price is worth it compared to the amount of points I think they will get compared to other players. Now it can get very complicated if we actually look at all the different statistics and how they're calculated and so on and so forth, and I don't want to scare anyone off from playing the game with some scary statistics and equations. So the simplest way to explain it is if we just look at this example that I'm going to put on the screen and take into account this doesn't consider injuries, games missed, substitutions, all those sorts of things. This is a very raw way of explaining it to people, so it's nice and simple. If we take Joshua King from last season, he started the game at 5.5 million. He came in at the end of the game at 6.2, and overall he scored 178 points. Now a lot of those points, bear in mind, were from the second half of the season. Then you have Kevin De Bruyne coming in at 10.5, which he stayed at for most of the game, and he got 199 points. The difference in price there is 5 million to 4.3 million by the end of the game, whereas the difference in points is only 21 points. Now if we look at strikers, potentially if you had Kevin De Bruyne in your side over Joshua King, you may have had to be cheaper on a striker further up the field and had Jermaine Defoe. He started the game at 7 million and finished at 7.4, although I'm pretty sure he raised above that during his peak. He got 166 points over the season, whereas Romelu Lukaku at 9 million and finishing the game at 10.1 got 221 points. The difference in price with these two players was 2 million at the start and it rose to 2.7 million. However, the difference in points was 55 points. So we can see an imbalance there, whereas the first example with King and De Bruyne, the difference in price is significant, but the difference in points isn't. Whereas with Defoe and Lukaku, the difference in price is smaller, but the difference in points is more than double the difference in the Joshua King and Kevin De Bruyne example. So basically, Joshua King's player value allowed 4 to 5 million to be spent elsewhere if you had played him instead of a premium choice midfielder. Now of course, the struggle there is you have to find the Joshua King and you have to find him early enough so his price isn't too high, and that's not always a simple prospect. But if you can find that, you can then maneuver players in certain positions to score more points overall in the game. So the strategy, I personally don't get bogged down too much with different statistics. I, off of last season, have a bunch of statistics in-game, in the actual physical game that I focus on, and then try and consider how many points I think those underlying stats will lead a player to score. And then I look at the price and compare players that have similar statistics. If two players have, in my mind, every possibility of scoring a very similar amount of points, I will pick the cheaper player. I generally try to look at the whole picture of my whole squad. It is very easy to just see someone like Dele Alli doing amazingly well and think I have to have Dele Alli in my side. But consider it, do you have to have Dele Alli if there is a player at 7.5 million that is only going to score 10 to 15 points less? A lot of how we play the game can be affected by hype in the press and hype for a player in general, so try and consider just points and player value. Jump on form players that are cheap as soon as possible because they could turn out to be the next must-have player for a season. And don't get too enthralled with the big hitters. I have been subject to this myself sometimes, where I start the game and try and get as many of the big players in as possible, and then it turns out that I could have just focused on 1 or 2 big hitters and supplemented the team with some cheaper options elsewhere. Anyway guys, I hope that explains to you the concept of player value. I didn't go too in depth with statistics because I didn't want to scare anyone off with it, but I hope you will now take that into consideration when building your sides, and I hope it helps. Hopefully I get this video up at 4, but it will be up to date no matter what. If you enjoy FPL content, please consider subscribing, and if you're a loyal fan of the channel, hit that like button and hit that notification bell when you want to be informed that an FPL Today video is up. I've been JNO, this has been FPL Today, and remember, it's all about the game.